Hello and welcome to Perspectives. I'm Lian Pick. Apple has taken China by storm. Louis Vuitton has been the brand Chinese women wear on their sleeves for many years now. For a country that's been drinking tea for centuries, there's a Starbucks on virtually every street corner in the main cities. If you've been to China lately, I'm not exactly telling you anything you don't already know. China has a huge demographic with a lot of money. And as the global economy slows, its masses of middle-class consumers are the prized catch for international companies hoping to battle sluggish economies back home in Europe and North America. Again, this is not entirely surprising. The Chinese have had money for a while, but what is new is how they're choosing to spend it is changing and changing fast. On today's program, we've enlisted 4 experts to explore the complex cultural makeup of its shoppers and the new rules of consumption in China. They are Christine Shi, Chief Marketing Officer for McDonald's China. It's worthy to note that Christine is the first mainland Chinese to hold her position in the history of McDonald's China. Amitabh Chattopadhyay from INSEAD, where he's the chaired professor in marketing and innovation. His most recent book is called The New Emerging Market Multinationals, 4 Strategies for Disrupting Markets and Building Brands. Claire Chung, also Shanghai-based, who drives global business development at Shangpin.com, China's largest luxury fashion online shopping platform. And representing J. Walter Thompson, the global advertising and marketing communications company, is Tom Doctoroff, CEO of its Asia-Pacific operations. Based out of Shanghai, Tom has authored 2 best-selling books, one called Billions, Selling to the New Chinese Consumer, and What Chinese Want. Welcome to the program, all of you.
Thank you.
Now, let's start with Christine. There are over 1.3 billion potential Big Mac eaters, obviously, in China. But we know that the country is no longer in the throes of that double-digit economic growth. So how has that impacted the fast food industry?
I think we've been seeing softness for sure since actually end of last year. However, you can't deny that China is still growing at a very fast pace. So it is actually quite similar to what we saw in the last financial recession cycle. So people still have money.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to continue opening all these stores?
For
so
sure.
You are planning, up to 2,000 by the end of the year. There's no change to that plan?
Yeah. So as I said, we believe Chinese consumers still have money. It is just they are a bit conservative in spending at this particular moment. So I think for the brands to capture the opportunity to grow, they just need to be more competitive.
Okay. Well, do you agree with that, Amitabh? I mean, McDonald's is obviously very bullish about China, but is China the market it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago or maybe even as recent as 2 years ago?
Definitely. I mean, I think that, what Christine said, that it's growing fast. It may not be growing at double digits, but 7.5 is a very strong rate compared to the rest of the world. And just yesterday, a news report suggested that there's likely to be a further uptick in the growth rate. So at this point, to slow down would be inappropriate. And in fact, our research shows that if you spend during a downtime, you come out much stronger because companies have a tendency to pull back. So if you bite the bullet and you have the resources to actually spend, then down the line, you're likely to come out a much bigger winner. So it's absolutely the correct thing to do.
All right. When Xi Jinping took charge of the Communist Party last year, basically to appease the Chinese public, which was increasingly sort of bitter about corruption and inequality, he declared this war on corruption and ostentatious displays of wealth by Chinese officials. How much of a dent has that made in consumption in China?
That by itself, very limited. I think for a short period of time, certain sectors, the cognacs, the spirit sectors, those that are focused on entertainment, particularly amongst the government officials, they suffered a setback. And perhaps it's never going to fully recover. But I think that people saw it for what it was, which is a signal of future intent.
Right.
And I think that really the big question now is the upcoming party Congress. And is the government going to announce believable, credible, incremental reforms that can keep the current growth paradigm going? That's what's on everybody's mind right now. And I do think that what you've said I agree with, that China is still a big market, it's growing, but I have noticed a little bit more anxiety amongst the general population, particularly the middle class, regarding the sustainability of the growth model if reforms aren't undertaken. So people are really looking for believable reform programs.
In the meantime, I guess companies are still trying to figure out, right, Claire, what the Chinese actually want. What exactly do they want at this point in time?
Well, I think we have a unique perspectives because we're the first one in China to offer full price and a lot of designer brands, contemporary brands in China. I think we see a shift from luxury spending to spending in affordable luxury and those aspirational lifestyle brands. Actually, Champagne was the first to sign a historic agreement with the CFDA, which is the Council of Fashion Designers of America. And we took that strategic decision because we believe a lot of American brands offer the full kind of lifestyle. And I think this is where the market is moving, especially with the second generation consumers. These were the consumers that were born in the 80s, growing up today. They're looking for different things, you know, and to communicate to them, I think, is a branding marketing manager's dream because they're very social media driven, you know.
Well, that's the fashion luxury market,
Yes.
but I think a lot of consumers, or so we've heard from overseas, that is, have been sort of moving towards food products because a lot of the product scandals which had happened in China in recent years. So I think as far as the food sector is concerned, would you say that that's certainly more secure vis-a-vis other product lines?
From a consumer insight standpoint, it's quite similar. I mean, like China is a big market, and given the complexity, so what we've seen is you have to stay both being affordable to the mass consumer, but also being aspiration to drive the demand. Yeah. So for instance, in our industry, right? So for the mass majority of products, you have to price right and then be relevant to the mass consumer, but also you have to establish your core product that really drives the demands. So to like promote the best and sell the rest.
Okay, we'll come to that in a minute. But I mean, in terms of this sort of eroded trust in products, as it were, do you see this sort of distrust sort of extended to other products, or would you say that is pretty much contained?
For many years now, the Chinese have had suspicion about the manufacturing integrity of goods produced in China. And obviously, any product that is ingested into the body is going to be particularly sensitive, and anything that children are consuming is going to be even more sensitive. So in that sense, Chinese consumers have become more willing to pay a price premium for those type of products that can guarantee safety and reassurance. So I do think that people have become much more sensitive over the past 5 years, ever since the melamine scandal, which was really a breakthrough in terms of eroding the trust of the Chinese people. But this has been something that has been ongoing for some time. It's not new.
Okay. Well, we talked about the fact that, you know, the Chinese economy is slowing, but seeing as it's going from a high growth market to a decent sort of growth market, is it enough just to be in China, to simply be there as it were in the old days? Amitabh?
No, I think things have changed because in the old days, I think it was the wealth was limited to the top tier cities, and I think there's wealth now happening in the lower tier, the second, the third, and the fourth tier cities. And I think it's very interesting because in these cities, they're not looking internationally quite in the same way as the consumers in the top tier cities have always looked. And as a result, there's a affiliation with the local brands. And so I think that for international brands, the longer they wait to move into these lower tier cities, they are allowing the incumbent to become the domestic brands, and it'll make it much, much, much harder. And it's not just in the business to consumer context, but in the business to business context, that's happening even more severely because local companies have gone in, built a brand, and now they own the consumer, if you will.
I would tend to agree and yet slightly and respectfully disagree.
Sure.
I think that you're right, that in lower tier cities there's more affiliation towards local brands. But the real litmus test is which brands are you willing to pay a price premium for? And still today, I think that it's pretty much true that there is no active preference for local brands once price is brought into the equation, except for very local categories like alcohol, spirits, and cigarettes. So I think the real challenge is the race to occupy that white space in the lower tier markets, between the cheaper local brands that are very accessible and have broad distribution, and the more premium but relatively inaccessible aspirational brands that are typically international.
So it's a matter of occupying that white space right across either the main cities or the third or the fourth tier cities, would you say?
Yeah, I think to China, right? So the brand entering China, the first thing has to be done is to get the scale.
Yeah.
So once the scale is there, then you have a foundation to leverage your whatever brand assets, your competitive advantage. But the first thing is to get the scale.
Yeah,
Okay.
rule number one is come in big. And this is an increasing challenge because the most unaffordable cost of building a brand or a business is generating awareness for that brand. Media is double or triple the cost on a cost per thousand basis of Western markets. So it's very expensive. And then, of course, there are the operational issues, which local brands do have an advantage of in terms of managing scale across broad swaths of time and space. So I absolutely agree with
Yeah.
you.
Okay, let's hold that thought because we got to go for a commercial break now. So the rule number one for access to China is to go in big and to get the scale. That's what our panelists are saying. Stay with us here on Perspectives. Welcome back to Perspectives. Now, we're talking about brand building in China, and we were talking about how to get in, when should one get in. When we look at all the top companies right now in China, McDonald's entered China in 1990. We had Volkswagen 1983, Nike 1981, Coca-Cola was there as far back as the 20s. All the more successful companies were actually pioneers in China entering before 2000. Is that the sure ticket? Amitabh, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, almost in every category, first movers have an advantage. I mean, because it's a new category, people are looking for meeting a need, and you're there. So
Okay.
there's nobody distracting you from thinking about this particular option, and it's the only game in town.
First mover is great, but given the fact that what Chinese consumers want right now are ever sort of changing. I mean, the challenge right now is whether or not companies actually understand, right, what the consumer wants, because their needs are evolving all the time.
I think a lot of foreign brands don't understand how competitive the market is. You know, on the fashion end, every single fashion brand in the world, international brands, as well as local European brands that really never extended into Asia before, are trying to come in. On top of that, let's not forget the Chinese manufacturers who have been great at producing many, many products are now looking to start their own brands. So it's really important for brands who want to take a position in China to come in now, otherwise they're going to lose that market share.
So when they take a position, how important is it to localize and adapt to local tastes? I mean, Christine, let's look at McDonald's, because we know a lot of your competitors in the fast food industry. If you look at any sort of KFC sort of menu, you know, they've got very Chinese items. They've got Chinese porridge. They've got diced chicken. You know, Starbucks has some black sesame tea, frappuccino. Is McDonald's going the same way? Have you felt the pressure to localize to that extent?
I think eventually menu is what we sell to the Chinese consumers. So to play in that market, you have to stay relevant to the Chinese consumers. So we do have local relevant menu choices to the Chinese consumer. However, the more important thing is how you market that. So I believe we have a right balance between where we have the global core products, but also we will have local product platforms. The thing is, the marketeer need to think about when you market these local relevant products, what is the add value you bring to the local customer, and then you try to own this platform, not being just local.
That's a critical point. Any international brand is going to be charging a price premium, and that means that they have to offer international cachet. They have to boast their globalism. But on the other hand, that needs to be brought into alignment with a very distinct Chinese worldview. The successful marketers are the ones that know how to do that without becoming schizophrenic. McDonald's is one company that has done that very admirably.
Yeah.
KFC has done it in a different way.
Sure. So I mean, a lot has been said about how, you know, the Chinese love Western products. They love all things foreign. They love Christmas. They love Santa Claus. But really, they also want, looking at those menus from those fast food companies, they also want companies to appeal to their Chineseness, right? I mean, they don't want to have a foreign lifestyle stuffed down their throats.
I always say that the Chinese are becoming more modern, more international, but they are not becoming Western. So it's critical that Chinese think of themselves as global citizens on a sophisticated level, but not becoming American or French or anything else. So they're modern incarnations of themselves.
I think it's important to understand that what does the brand stand for? And that goes to the idea of not only just the international cachet, but what are the values that it's bringing? And then when you localize, you need to have a portfolio of offerings that bring out that value proposition in the localization. And I think that's the crucial step that's needed if you're going to succeed. The global product line, the local product line, both synergistically making that same value proposition to the customer.
Well, there's the value proposition, there's the international cachet which is needed, but, you know, according to this McKinsey report, 40% of Chinese consumers are loyal to one brand compared with 70% of American consumers, which seems to suggest that because consumerism is relatively new to China, that the Chinese haven't quite developed that sort of relationship with brands, would you say, Claire?
Yes, I think the Chinese consumer still needs to be coached, and they're still experimenting with many brands. Yeah. And we find that in terms of the fashion side, on the online marketplace, they're usually discount-driven. When they search for a product, they actually search by product. You know, this is because Chinese e-consumers grew up on a multi-platform, and so they're looking really for the best value. A lot of brands are now using styling. That's what we're doing to bring added value to educate them on the full lifestyle. Myself, I've noticed a huge also shift in terms of the salaries in China. People are able to afford more affordable luxury. They're really looking to lifestyle, and the Chinese woman is looking through fashion as a way to express themselves. And this is something very new and exciting.
But coming back to the fact that there isn't a lot of brand loyalty, Tom, I mean, you know, if the Chinese consumer is so promiscuous, right? I mean, what's the glue?
I don't think they're promiscuous at all. I think that is a myth. I think that if you define a brand, a strong brand, as one that has a consistent relationship with consumers over time, that addresses a fundamental need, that Chinese are perhaps even more loyal than Western consumers, although the statistics don't bear it out. Because brands to Chinese consumers are not just brands. They are tools on the battlefield of life. They're weapons of advancement. And as a result, when a relationship is strong, the loyalty will be equally strong. I think one of the problems is, yes, there is newness and there is a degree of coaching that's required, but oftentimes we suffer from inconsistent messages. It is the responsibility of marketers not just to coach consumers, but also to forge those relationships that endure over time. And this means that their messages need to be clear, their platforms need to be consistent, and the relationship needs to be well articulated. So I think Chinese consumers are quite loyal when things work.
Okay. How has that fed into some of the success stories like McDonald's, like LVMH, etc., that, you know, consumption and products and shopping are part of the tools in the battlefield of life to further one's aspirations, one's status, etc.?
I think IKEA is a great example of a success story in China, and how that aspirational lifestyle, they have a strong core DNA brand identity. You have families bringing in their families, spending the whole day at IKEA, and I think this is a great success story for others to follow.
The curious thing about IKEA, wouldn't you say, Tom, was that IKEA as a global brand was a mass market brand. Right. Now, when it came to China, it was relatively more expensive for the Chinese. So wasn't that all very confusing for the Chinese consumer who basically was into aspirational buying? Actually,
IKEA is very interesting because they came in and they had 2 stores, one in Shanghai and one in Beijing, with the highest footfall in the world, but the lowest per visitor purchase expenditure. And the reason for that is that the goods were too expensive. They didn't get the price-value equation right. There is a golden rule in marketing, and that is that goods that are consumed outside of the home can afford a much higher price premium because it's a status projector. Goods that are consumed inside the home are extremely price sensitive, which is why the leading mobile phone brands command huge price premiums. They're international, but the dishwashers that are consumed inside the house are local. Yeah. So IKEA was aspirational, yes, but they could not afford the same type of price premium that other categories could. So they had to adjust that price-value equation, and once they did, the business started to take off.
So this equation between aspirational buying and extreme price sensitivity,
let's just call it accessibility.
Yeah, accessibility. And that's what Apple tried to do recently, right? When it marketed the two iPhones. You had the 5S and you had the cheaper 5C version, and apparently the 5C didn't do so well because it's aspirational, right? And Chinese consumers are more willing to shell out for the more expensive product, would you say?
Well, I think that the pricing strategy for the Apple 5C is very confused because it is neither accessible and it's less aspirational than the highest model, the highest price. So I don't know exactly what they're trying to do. But I will say that Apple has a big problem in China in terms of extending its scale downward as the market becomes more competitive because of its limited range. So I do think that 5C is really going to be an interesting failure.
Okay, speaking of failures, I mean, we've got IKEA, but of course we've also got companies like Home Depot who've exited the market. We've got Best Buy, which is struggling. We've got Tesco's, which has sort of transferred its company to a Chinese sort of controlled joint venture. Why do foreign companies typically stumble in China, you think?
Well, I think it's difficult to get the assortment right. I mean, all of the items, all of the brands that you mentioned over there, they're companies that are retailing. And there you're really looking at the challenge of getting the right assortment of goods because you're not buying the brand there, you're buying what they're selling for you. And so then how you sell it, how you price it, what's the assortment that you've got there is really going to drive your sales. And I think that's far more challenging than figuring out, well, will my particular product sell and who's the target consumer for that. So I think it's a more challenging environment to deal with. But you really have strong retailers in China who are local, who are in consumer electronics, for example, who have a big footprint. They have alliances with the local manufacturers, which makes it a much harder step for, let's say, a Best Buy to succeed in China.
But look at the commonalities of the failures of retail marketing versus the successes. The failures are Best Buy, Home Depot, B&Q. The successes are Uniqlo, any of the luxury brands, Zara, H&M, McDonald's, KFC. These are all brands that are publicly consumed. Once you get into products that are consumed inside the house, you have to be very attentive to price. So you take a look at the Best Buy model, which was basically based on one thing, and that's deep segment experience in terms of retail support in the store. Consumers are not willing to pay a premium for that. So the business model was wrong. Starbucks changed its business model so that it could conform to the public consumption imperative. Howard Schultz in America has this third space, this site of private indulgence between home and office. But in China, the stores are bigger, the tables are broader, the food menu is broader because people don't go in there alone. They go in there with their friends and their professional colleagues to proclaim affiliation with a new generation elite. So you have to conform to the public consumption imperative.
So consumers are willing to shell out for the luxury goods, goods which they consume outside the household, whereas for the goods they consume indoors, they're very, very price sensitive. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Perspectives. Now, before the break, we were talking about what Chinese consumers are willing to pay for. Now, the Chinese are totally enamored with the American dream. Do they get the American dream, and are the motivations basically what motivates an American consumer in terms of, look, if I acquire enough wealth, then I've got the freedom that comes with that wealth, and what I buy, etc., is part of freedom?
The American dream is rooted in individualism and transcending society's restrictions. I always call American individualism the Eve's apple of marketing. It's tempting, it's succulent, but if you bite into it, you will get banished to the land of outcasts. The Chinese are not individualistic. They have big egos in the sense of demanding societal acknowledgement. They want to achieve, they want to be noticed, but they don't want to rebel from society, and they don't want to be independent of society. So oftentimes the Chinese dream is the ability to navigate successfully society as opposed to transcend it. So I think that the dreams are quite different, although in subtle ways.
How has that affected the marketing efforts at McDonald's? Because obviously McDonald's is the company, the mascot, if you like, of the American dream. How do you sell that to Chinese consumers? Are they still sort of going to fast food restaurants not for the sheer pleasure of it, but because they're seen there and it's trendy and it's cool and it makes them feel that they have arrived?
Let me put it in this way, because I'm a mainland Chinese, right? So from a China perspective, while you see this spending power raising, and then the market has just opened the door to the world, like people was exposure to more brand and more choices. So the needs are getting sophisticated for sure, right? There is an element that people want to be more diversified life. So it is for the marketeer, it is how can you merit this opportunity to your brand strengths. So I'll give you an example, for instance, McCafe, right? China is a premature market for coffee. However, there's a huge market size for coffee consumption. So people are consuming coffee, but they don't really know about coffee. But it is sort of like a status, or it is sort of a symbol of lifestyle. So it is an opportunity providing to the marketeer to grab that opportunity. It is just, you need to base on the consumer insights.
Coffee is very interesting because in home, the only coffee that sells is the instant 3-in-1 coffee. Out of home, people will pay $5 for a cup of Starbucks. So again, that's a different motivations than in the West. People are not going to really shell out a lot of money to have that aroma and that indulgence, inside the home, because it's not meaningful to them.
Yeah, but I would say there's emotional benefit to them because they enjoy the total experience rather than just the coffee function.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about the luxury market, right? Now, there is a saying that going luxe is no longer celebratory in China. It's now a necessity, which means that it's now part of the lifestyle.
Right.
Would you agree?
Well, I think part of the American dream, the part that's relevant to the Chinese consumer is the work ethic. Chinese work hard, we work hard, so we deserve to enjoy ourselves. And I think in terms of the fashion or affordable luxury brands, Chinese consumers are becoming much more sophisticated in the sense that they understand value for money. I think there's a huge potential for those type of brands to enter China that offer great value for money and lifestyle. The sweet spot, what we see that's selling out is around 1,000 to 2,000 renminbi. We see customers coming weekly for jewelry. These are impulse buys. These are emotional buys. I think another relevant factor is the transformation of the Chinese woman. I mean, my grandmother was the last generation woman with bound feet. I still remember that. And you see now the freedom that they have in terms of their careers and their ability to purchase. 70% of our customer base is coming from platinum credit card holders, and they're women. So it's a Chinese female consumer. I mean, that's a whole other story to do down the road.
Okay.
That's making those decisions.
Yeah. Well, in the past, I mean, the Chinese always felt that anything which was low priced was the ultimate, and then they swung to luxury goods, where if it's the most expensive, then it's the best thing. And now you're talking about them recognizing that there is this thing called value for money.
Absolutely.
Do you think that understanding has spread across the country?
I think that luxury in China plays a very distinct role. Luxury is a tool. It's not something to be simply enjoyed. It's not an indulgence. It's not internalized in terms of a benefit. There are two characteristics of the Chinese luxury market that I think are striking. One, actually, men buy more luxury products than women in China. And second, the youth is a huge luxury market. And the reason for this is that luxury is a means to an end in China. I'm not saying that everything you've just mentioned is not true. Of course, people are discovering a new price-value equation, and then women are wanting to please themselves. But I still think that people are paying a premium for luxury because it helps make a statement of intention. It's a declaration of success.
But would you say that they're getting a little bit more discerning and savvier in their consumption? I mean, they're not all going to sort of drop into Galeries Lafayette in Paris and then wipe out the entire LV store these days. I mean, they want something which is more distinct.
Oh, definitely they do. And that's why as you get even more wealthier into the upper middle class and the very wealthy, you need to become more understated as well. So if you take a look at Louis Vuitton, for example, and how it brands its bags, the cheaper bags are a little bit more obvious. Then as it goes up, the design is more understated. Finally, at the tip of the pyramid, it's about personalization. So really, understatement, discernment, connoisseurship, all of these values are what define not just the high-end luxury buyer, but a master of the universe. And it's still ultimately a statement of control, but an understated, soft, iron glove statement of control.
That's fun. So between sales in China, luxury goods, sales of luxury goods in China and, you know, sort of Chinese nationals going overseas to buy luxury goods, I mean, are we going to see a market that's not only going to fuel, obviously, the luxe market in China, but also the global luxe market for many years to come, Amitabh?
Clearly, with 7.5% growth or better, it's going to be, you're going to see a large number of people getting wealthier and wealthier every year, and status being a driving force in China. As Tom was saying, I mean, this is a tool to display the fact that you have arrived, and so we're going to see more and more purchase of luxury. But I think you're going to see more and more premiumization. So I think, you know, going back to at every level, the consumer is going to look for, can I buy that next level up? Mm-hmm. So for somebody, it may be Louis Vuitton. For somebody else, it may be Coach, right? And for somebody else, it may be a locally made brand. And so you're seeing Chinese players getting into that game very well. Mm-hmm. So take Ybor. Okay, it's a watch company. It's part of the Haidian Group. And they've now launched a series of watch brands. I mean, previously they were entirely in the sub-1,000 renminbi watch bracket. But they've now come up with a brand called Code X, which is entirely made in Switzerland by a Swiss subsidiary that they've bought and sold as a Swiss watch. They've come up with EC, which is using some of that technology that they've now acquired from Switzerland, and it's in the middle of the sub-1,000 and the $3,000, so 18,000, and they've got the EC brand. So they've started creating this path, if you will, like you had many years ago with GM, where you started with the Chevy and you ended up with the Cadillac, and so they're also getting into that premiumization. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to see that happening more and more in China because you're seeing a wealthier and wealthier group of consumers.
Price tiering is a critical strategy of China. You have to have something that's both aspirational, and then you have to have the goods that can sell more accessibly. A key mandate of China is when you come in as a foreign brand, you come in aspirational, and then you work to extend that brand downwards and out. Yeah. So you want to, how did you say that before?
Affordable at the lower level.
No, but you said sell the, you said...
sell the best. Promote the best, sell the best.
So building that premium image is very critical. And then, once you have that pyramid established, then I absolutely agree that the marketing goal is to help people climb from one level to another level.
Mm. Yeah, but just to add on, I think the pricing strategy has to come together with the product strategy and brand strategy. But for each segment, you do need to have unique selling proposition to be differentiated from all the others so that you can occupy that space.
Absolutely, and even being a little bit more specific, at each level, you need to be able to afford a price premium versus competition as a demonstration of that point of difference.
Okay.
Western brands are never going to be able to compete on price.
Got it. So promote the best, sell the rest, come in aspirational, then make it accessible. Stay tuned to us here on Perspectives. Welcome back to Perspectives. Now, we've talked about Lux, we've talked about fast food, we've talked about the winners and the losers, but we haven't talked about online strategy. So let's talk about it. According to Bain & Company, 2013 will be remembered as the year in which China surpassed the US as the world's largest digital retail market, because online shopping, it seems, is more important in China than it is in America. Do you think that's going to happen?
Absolutely. The China online space is going to really set new benchmarks for everyone. And it's an amazing platform for new brands to come in, not only in terms of a distribution channel, but as a communication channel and building the brand awareness in China.
So what exactly is driving all this online traffic? I mean, some quarters, while Pricewaterhouse actually says the consumers in the third and fourth tier cities are the ones which are very aggressive online because they can't find what they want in those cities.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think there are two key reasons for the explosion in e-commerce. Once you got past the security concerns, which is what slowed things down, one is transparency and the fact that you can buy anything, and second is the lack of availability of bricks and mortars alternatives in the lower tier cities. So this makes e-commerce really quite revolutionary in China.
So, I mean, essentially what this means is if Alibaba is right too, and obviously the e-commerce giant in China, they say that online spending could account for nearly half of all the country's retail spending in a decade. Obviously, companies can't go in without an online strategy.
Absolutely. They have to go online. They have to then also understand their social media strategy as a lead-in to build the brand awareness. You know, there's an amazing case study I'd like to share with you. We brought the American brand Ash shoes online in China. We signed an online exclusive with them, and we did a lot of promoting using social media, celebrities, and in a short year and a half, we saw 1,000% growth in sales, and that's phenomenal. And this is the power of online China, to take a small brand like this and make it boom with this type of huge potential.
If online is so strong, why are companies still going in and setting up all these massive flagship stores? I mean, if you take a stroll down any of the famous shopping streets in Shanghai, you've got the best flagship stores, Apple, Sephora, Forever 21. I mean, why are they doing that?
Projection of status
That's
and building
marketing,
the brand.
pure marketing.
They're the most expensive billboards in the world, but still, the market grows into those retail outlets. So.
Yeah, I think another thing is, of course, the online opportunity is huge, right? But the fundamental reason, I think, is because the people's lifestyle has been changing. If you see like how many mobile devices you guys carry, right? So it is a reversed trend. But I think the online strategy cannot be seen as isolate. It is about how do you bring it to life through all the touch points. So O2O, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why you still need retail physical presence there.
Yeah, you have to have a consistent brand experience.
Yes.
A creative idea has to be like water. It has to assume the media that surrounds it. So you have to be fundamentally media neutral, but we get a little too technical now. I'd just like to, wait, one quick point is the social media strategy is so important, though, because the Chinese are very emotionally involved with how they express themselves online. It's a blank canvas for self-expression. So online opinion leaders, endorsements, absolutely critical. So building your social presence is critical.
Without a bricks and mortar presence, you just don't have the credibility. So you cannot divorce online from bricks and mortar, which is why, aside from the fact that it's an expensive billboard, it still has to be there, because if you go in pure as an online play, people don't take you seriously. They're uncertain. They're not sure whether you're in it for the long haul. What will they do if things go wrong? And so this is very crucial.
If you look at how e-commerce has evolved in China, obviously a lot of the online buying is much more strong for a lot of companies who aren't even physically in China yet, the way they were in the U.S. You were there bricks and mortar first, and then you migrate your consumers online. In China, the online has actually almost overtaken a lot of the buying. So can't somebody just go in and take the e-commerce plunge and just go with that?
Sorry, we can agree to disagree here, because I think that online is not appropriate for generating broad awareness. Now, I'm not saying that you can't generate significant sales, but if you really want to establish a franchise that is enduring, online is not the way that you establish brand awareness and deep brand affiliation. That has to be done, as you were saying, with a completely integrated marketing program that establishes the relationship.
I think online can be an opportunity to test the market first. And pop-up stores and these are things that are happening online. I think many brands, I think this is a key point, is also in terms of on the fashion side, have always had senior management based outside of China. No. So they're testing the market online as they then place in senior management, Chinese senior management, who then can roll out all the brick and mortar, because that takes time. And in the interim, they're losing market share and creating that buzz about the brand. So I think online becomes a great testing opportunity as they build up the brick and mortar and execute.
So there were quite a lot of trust issues with buying online earlier, which was also why the American auction house eBay failed pretty spectacularly in China. Is that a thing of the past now?
Pretty much, I think it is, because companies like Alipay exist so that people don't hand over the merchandise until they have tested the product. So it wasn't until these needs for reassurance and online security were addressed that the e-commerce really took off. So I think that Chinese have overcome their technological concerns, but the business models have been adapted to make sure that that's possible.
Online for McDonald's, does that exist as a strategy?
Of course, we have online business for the delivery service, and it accounts for almost 40% of total delivery service. But again, to that point, right, so to make the online sales happen, you still rely on a complete operation model. So a big part of the experience is really how people get the food delivered to their home, and then the way the food is presented, and then whether it is hot and fresh. So it really rely on the offline experience to make the online happen.
There's no silver bullet for success in China. There are no shortcuts.
Let's take a look and try to wrap up what we've discussed so far. We know that every brand's road to success because there is no silver bullet. I mean, that's going to be different in China. But what sort of advice would you give to companies trying to get into that market?
So I would think that companies need to go in big and to go into the smaller cities right up front. And I think they need to have a well thought out and integrated business model and not sort of wander in there with sort of a tepid strategy, shall we say, instead of a full-blown well thought out strategy. You can't go to China and sort of do a flag planting exercise and hope that something's going to come off it.
Okay. Christine, you've made history, obviously, as the first Chinese national to be the chief marketing officer in the history of McDonald's China, which really underlines, I guess, the adage that it takes one to know one. That, I think companies right now feel like they need people from that country to understand the market and the culture and then be able to sell to your fellow nationals. What do you think?
I think that also reflects the fact of you have to be consumer focused, consumer oriented, so that to make your brand success. So I would say to market to the Chinese market, you have to be relevant, but also differentiated. And to be differentiated, you have to keep yourself innovative, up to date, so that you drive this aspiration element.
Tom, you've been in China for some years now. I mean, looking at how quickly the Chinese market is evolving, what sort of key advice would you give to companies, I mean, in order for them to be successful with this ever-evolving consumer, as it were?
Well, I would say that some things change quickly, but one thing that doesn't change is that the basic motivations of the Chinese people are pretty much constant. Chinese people want to climb a ladder of success. They want brands that are tools on that journey of success, and they want to strengthen their relationship with other elements of society. So Chinese are not becoming Western, and we have to make sure that as they become modern, they do not aspire to be American.
Okay. Claire, let's give you the last word. Yes. Is China for every brand, do you think?
No, I don't think China is for every brand. And I think brands need to really understand their local competitors and their price points, as you mentioned before, is very, very important. I do believe, however, that they need to be more flexible in their strategies. On the luxury side, many luxury brands still don't want to go online. And that's a eternal debate. But I think for affordable luxury brands, I mean, these brands don't have the funds to do overall strategies. They don't have the funds. They've never been in China, but people love the products because they see them, going in their stores already in the United States, in London. You have the whole entire British high street has not yet hit. They're hoovering around Hong Kong looking, and so I think there's a lot of potential now.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank my guests, Christine Shi from McDonald's, Amitava Chattopadhyay from INSEAD, Claire Chung from Shangpin.com, and Tom Docheroff from J. Walter Thompson. It is clear, despite the recent slowdown in Chinese growth, government reforms designed to unleash the potential of urbanization are expected to fuel domestic consumption for the next decade. A recent McKinsey report on the 2020 Chinese consumer says most large consumer companies will need Chinese shoppers to power their growth in the next decade. Well, whether it's the 2020 consumer or today's consumer, anyone who wants to crack the Chinese market will need to constantly figure out the complexities of what China wants. That's it for Perspectives this month. Do help us shape our next program. You can write or connect with us by leaving your comments on our website, and you can tweet us as well. I'm Lian Pick. Till our next edition of Perspectives, thanks for watching.